Hi there, it's me again, John. Uh, you're right, and there's also something deep within that says maybe you're missing out on something as well. You see, I absolutely agree with you on many things. I think that religions, particularly religious structures, can be very much about power, about control, about manipulation. And the issues and the problems of the world, or at least of human beings in the world, are absolutely immense. Just look around you, um, and we see tremendous, what I can only describe as evil in this world. On an international level, you have governments torturing people. Um, you have armies invading, raping, pillaging. You have a world where actually um, we're producing enough food for everybody to eat. Um, but we have maybe a third of the world starving, while somebody like me lives in relative opulence and can even make these YouTube videos. And then above me, there are millionaires and multi-millionaires and billionaires. Um, you know, yes, the world is full of problems. Um, but the fundamental problem is, I suggest, not just, if you like, in the structures that exist, the governmental structures, the religious structures, um, the the um, the structures that are all around us. Um, the fundamental thing is that all of these structures derive from us as human beings. And as human beings, we are addicted to manipulation, power, and control. And even, for example, the religion that started in the name of Jesus um, very rapidly became a religion about power and control, despite the fact that Jesus is recorded as saying that we should not be as the Gentiles are, to lord it over one another, but anyone who must be great must be servant of all. Um, it seems to me that the fundamental problem, or one of the fundamental issues, is the issue of fundamentalism, a belief in the rigidity of doctrine and beliefs, versus, and there's all sorts of fundamentalisms around, not just religious fundamentalism, um, capitalist fundamentalism, communist fundamentalism, yeah? There's all sorts of these fundamentalisms around, and part of the problem is that we as human beings crave the sort of security that these very rigid doctrinal structures, be they religious or non-religious structures, actually give. And for me, to be part of the solution actually is to say, well, yes, I need to love my neighbour as myself, and I need to love myself. And all of us, I think we need to start, in a way, to stop rather trusting all these external authority figures and start going deep within to find the truth within, and that in itself will eventually give rise to new ways of doing things. I am extremely impressed with a wonderful story in Mark's Gospel of Jesus healing the man with the withered hand. Now, for one moment, just leave aside whether you believe those healings or not. Just look at what that story says about Jesus. And that story, even though I'm no longer a fundamentalist Christian, that story inspires me. Jesus was in the synagogue. There was a man with a withered hand, and the Pharisees were hoping that he might heal so that they could actually point accusations against him. And it says that Jesus was angry with them. Now here is a good example, an example of a man, Jesus, who puts compassion before rules and regulations. And that challenges us, whether we're Christian or not. Do we make compassion the first principle of our life? Or do we, with the Pharisees, it doesn't have to be Jewish Pharisees, it can be Christian Pharisees, it can be atheistic Pharisees, in that sense of legalism, Phariseeism being legalism. Do we put rules and regulations before love, before compassion? The hierarchies, governments, international governments, all live by, in a sense, putting regulations and rules above compassion. And Jesus was angry with that because compassion was took priority. And then it goes on to say, he asks them, is it lawful to do good or to do ill on the Sabbath? And he gives an example of how a farmer might go and rescue a sheep. I think that's in Mark, I have to double check. And the Pharisees were still angry with him. They were still determined in their legalism. And so what happens next? Well, what happens next is that Jesus says, stretch out your hand. And it was healed. And it says, I think, that they went away to plot. Now, the fundamental question is, how are we in ourselves? Do we favour legalism over compassion, or compassion over legalism? I'm not at all surprised that with an attitude like Jesus, that the Pharisees, the legalists, those who love lording it over each other, crucified him. Even at the Last Supper, even at the trial before Pilate, Jesus was self-contained. He was self-aware, self-knowledgeable. He was in control. And it's not surprising that the Jewish and Roman authorities crucified this man. Although I do think that there was some buck passing to the Jewish authorities in the early Christians because they wanted to please the Romans. I think the Romans were equally responsible. And that's the challenge. The challenge of Jesus, in my view, do we put compassion first, or do we stick to those rules and regulations? Now, a lot of people who claim to follow Jesus are actually into rules and regulations. Something that my mother said a few months before she died was this. She said, looked into my eyes and said, love, Tom, it's the only thing in the world. And that's what we need to base